Welcome to Creamer Media's Polity. I'm Amy Witherden. With me in the studio is Ebrahim Fakir of the Electoral Institute of Southern Africa, speaking on the state of politics in South Africa, nearly 2 months into President Jacob Zuma's administration. Ebrahim, given the performance of opposition parties in Parliament thus far in terms of oversight, what is the future of opposition politics in South Africa?
Well, the future of opposition politics, Amy, could go one way or the other. And I think we also have to disaggregate some of the opposition parties because clearly I think some, because of the numbers that they have in the national legislature as well as in the provincial legislatures, means that they may perform a better oversight role in terms of the ruling party and demand a greater level of accountability from them. Whereas other opposition parties may in fact be able to make sound policy submissions, propose alternatives, but because of the lack of critical mass, a lack of concentration of numbers, it will be very difficult for them, I think, to be able to make the impact that they potentially could in an open democratic system. Simply because I think South Africa's parliament has moved firmly away from decision making largely at the plenary level towards a concentration of decision making at committee level, where the real cut and thrust of debate happens. And when you look at the spread of numbers of the political parties, because of the low numbers that opposition parties generally have, it is very difficult, perhaps even if you have 20 members, to spread yourself across closely around 40 or 50 committees in Parliament. So it's very difficult, I think, for them to cover the kind of portfolios that they ought to. So that's a practical reason why I think opposition parties fare so badly. But all of this then must go back to the actual mandate which has been given to the opposition parties by South Africans. And of course it seems as if that mandate, while the election results show an upswing in some support for opposition political parties, the majority of the ANC still remains firmly in place. So I think there is both political as well as practical, administrative, procedural, executive reasons why political opposition parties perform so badly. That notwithstanding, they have been able to use the public space, particularly the media, through releasing their own press statements, public relations campaigns, and other political campaigns to make a certain noises on particular policy issues that they may have been unhappy about. But when we talk about disaggregating the political parties, it seems as if the Democratic Alliance seems to be consolidating its role as opposition party nationally and consolidating its role as a ruling party in the Western Cape. However, parties like the Congress of the People, because of their own internal political dynamics, which is the third dimension above the political and the practical issues of internal cohesion, internal policy disputes, internal leadership disputes, is almost at the brink of make or break. They could well perform very well in the next elections if they're able to consolidate a cohesive party position inside the party and overcome the leadership obstacles that they have. The prospects, however, for the 2011 local government elections, particularly for a party like the Congress of the People and some of the other opposition parties like AZAPO, for instance, are indeed in fact very bleak. And I signal those two political parties simply because if one looks at the election results, which we've now had some time to look at in detail, they have political support across the country, but no real concentrated support in a particular geographic area. And in a political system, a purely proportional representative political system like South Africa, that stands you in good stead to garner some minimum level of political support across the country, because you can gather votes from across the country in this proportional representation system. But when you come to a local government system, which is a dual system, in which you have both a proportional representative element, in which you will elect a political party, and depending on who and how up you are in the party list, would get elected, together with a geographic constituency representation system, if you don't have a critical mass and concentration of support in a particular area, it will be very difficult for you to be able to garner that kind of political support and representation. So the prospects, if they don't consolidate and if they don't come up with a coherent policy program, particularly at the local level, it will be very difficult for them to garner political support. And that, of course, means that they would play a lesser role in the formal political process nationally. In representative institutions particularly, whether it be national government, provincial legislatures and local government. But therein lies a conundrum, because there's been two suggestions, I think, with regard to restructuring the state system, both which affect the provinces and the local government system. And of course, there's suspicions about why the ANC is mooting as a ruling party and as a government both of these proposals. And of course, it's something I suppose we can touch on later. But I think opposition parties, the fourth area in which they haven't performed as well as they could have, even though we're 2 or 3 months into a post-election phase, is that I think their oversight capacity, because of the previous 3 reasons, practicality, issues of political mandate, issue of policy coherence, have not been able to really play a critical oversight role and hold government to account, particularly in 3 areas. Firstly, the fact that the state structure system has not been adequately and fully defined, particularly post the 2009 election. We have a planning commission, we have a monitoring and evaluation unit in the presidency, both of which it is mooted will be given some kind of legislative mandate. But I'm not convinced that there has been, or at least have not seen, a discussion paper or a delimiting of the powers and functions and mandates of these 2 institutions. Then when we come to the question of the 17th local government constitution amendment bill, which will affect the powers of local government, the mooting of the idea that we should rationalize the provinces or do away with them altogether, accumulatively, when you add the fact that there's a move towards a single public service nationally, together with the realignment of public service departments and ministries, means that there is some kind of restructuring of the state system going on, but which is not adequately defined, which in fact has had an effect on the way in which government has been able to respond to the constituencies that it ought to. And some of that impending crisis, I think, is almost suggesting to us that there is some level of breakdown in the responsiveness, accountability, oversight relationship between government and its social partners. Because in every area of our public life in which we look, there is some kind of protest activity going on. Immediately post the 2009 elections, you've had a whole range of social protests in many local communities going on, continuing a trend which began over the last decade, firstly. Secondly, the amount of industrial action, whether in the private sector or in the public sector, has obviously intensified over the last 3 months. Then you look at the bus rapid transport system and the taxi drivers, and you have outstanding issues which have not been resolved with respect to the taxi drivers and the new mooted public transport system. There's a crisis at the public broadcaster. Many private sector providers are being investigated by the Competition Commission. There's strikes with doctors going on, and so in many areas of our public life, there is this intensified level of activity, and part of this is, I think, is an attempt in a situation and a context in which the state system has not been adequately defined and state capacity is not as high as it ought to be. It's a level of demand for accountability and responsiveness from a government in particular sectors, and that seems to be suggesting that this kind of industrial social protest action is set to continue for a while until we can have a state structure in place which is going to begin to be more cohesively responsive to the kind of demands which have been made by these constituencies in society.